Boycotts have been a peaceful tool of resistance used by many social movements throughout history. Their purpose is to place the power in the people's hands and put nonviolent economic pressure on governments and institutions to listen to their citizens. During the Civil Rights Movement, there were a handful of boycotts to protest segregation in the South. There were the sit-ins, the Freedom Riders, and most notably, the Montgomery bus boycotts, in which the black citizens of Montgomery protested the segregated city buses for a 13-month-long period in response to the arrest of Rosa Parks. Despite being met with multiple acts of resistance along the way, the boycotts continued. The boycotts finally ended in December of 1956, following the Supreme Court's Browder v. Gale decision, which ruled segregation on public buses unconstitutional. There was also the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa during the 1900s, with economic boycotts, school and cultural boycotts, and international boycotts, divestment, and sanctions becoming renowned resistance tactics throughout the latter half of the century.
And even in town centre stores like Woolworths, the boycott is biting.
This strategy was incredibly effective and ultimately resulted in the dissolution of the country's segregationist laws. It was this struggle against apartheid in South Africa that inspired a new movement in response to Israel's treatment of the Palestinian people, BDS. Ever since the Nakba in 1948, when Zionist forces killed more than 15,000 Palestinians and left over 750,000 displaced in order to establish the state of Israel, Palestinians have endured humanitarian atrocities such as ethnic cleansing and forced displacement. Israel has also subjected the Palestinian people to violence from the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, bombings, displacement, arbitrary arrests, denying access to clean water, and more. In response to these human rights violations, the BDS movement was born. BDS, standing for boycotts, divestment, and sanctions, is another method of boycotting, specifically putting pressure on the Israeli government to cease their mistreatment of the Palestinian people. However, in recent years, this peaceful tool of resistance has been targeted by legislation across the country, restricting companies and sometimes individuals' rights to boycott Israel. Iowa is one of 38 states that has such laws, and its consequences are grave. So today, I will be answering a few questions. 1. What exactly is the BDS movement and anti-BDS legislation? 2. How is it affecting Iowans? 3. What are some arguments against the BDS movement? And 4. How can we respond to these laws and build transnational solidarities as Iowans? So first, what exactly is BDS and anti-BDS legislation? Since its founding in 2005, BDS has gained worldwide traction among scholars, activists, churches, labor unions, and just everyday people around the world. The BDS call demands Israel to end its 3 forms of oppression against the Palestinian people. Its demands are: 1. End Israel's occupation and colonization of all Arab lands occupied in 1967 and dismantling the wall. 2. Recognizing the fundamental rights of the Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality. And 3. Respecting, protecting, and promoting the rights of the Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and properties stipulated in UN Resolution 194. To sum these up, the goal of the BDS movement is to hold Israel accountable for its violations of international law and human rights in the pursuit of freedom, justice, self-determination, equality, and sustainable peace. However, in 38 states across the country, laws have been passed that infringe on individuals' and companies' rights to boycott Israel. These laws pertain to either state contracts, in which state employees are required to pledge in their employment contract that they won't boycott Israel, or state investments, in which the state restricts its funding of companies that boycott Israel. Like I said, Iowa is one of these states. Its laws target state investment in companies as well as public employees' retirement funds. In Arkansas, Arizona, Georgia, Kansas, Maryland, and Texas, states where public employees must verify in their contract that they won't boycott Israel, there have been legal challenges to these laws. In most of these cases, the court ruled against the legislation. However, in each one of these states, after the decision, the state responded with amendments to the law, which excluded the plaintiff from needing to abide by these laws. And in February of this year, the Arkansas case was denied a hearing at the Supreme Court. Despite there being many legal challenges to BDS laws across the country, there have not been any challenges to Iowa law. Without any legal challenges to the bills in our home state, it's hard to understand the ramifications that these bills have. This brings me to my next question. How are these laws affecting Iowans? First, let's take a look at the bill that was signed into law in 2016. House File 2331 was signed by the then Iowa Governor Terry Branstad on May 10, 2016, and took effect in July of that same year. The bill reads, "The General Assembly is deeply concerned and does not support boycotts and related tactics that have become a tool of economic warfare that threaten the sovereignty and security of allies and trade partners of the United States, including the State of Israel. Therefore, the General Assembly intends that state funds and funds administered by the state, including public employee retirement funds, should not be invested in, and public contracts should not be entered into with, companies that refuse to engage in commerce with Israel and boycott Israel, or persons doing business in Israel or territories controlled by Israel. Summed up, this law prevents the state from funding any company that doesn't do business in Israel or its territories, as well as public employees' retirement funds being invested in these companies. It labels such entities as scrutinized companies and goes on to say that the state will compile a scrutinized companies list or blacklist of businesses that the state will refuse to invest in. In 2022, an amendment was passed that broadened the parameters for a company to be included in HF 2331, specifically targeting Ben & Jerry's ice cream. According to House File 2373, a company that falls under the BDS bill is any business or business entity, including a wholly owned subsidiary, majority-owned subsidiary, parent company, or affiliate of such business or business entity that is publicly traded and that is not based in the United States. With the help of my finance bro dad, I was able to understand this amendment to mean any foreign company doing business in Iowa, other companies with the same ownership, and American branches of foreign companies. Though with no formal challenge to the law, it's hard to see how this can affect the everyday Iowan. To better understand the case here in Iowa, I sat down with a couple of local leaders, Pat Miner and Numan Abu Issa, who are involved with the Iowa City-based political group Iowans for Palestine.
My name is Pat Miner, and I have been involved with the Israeli-Palestinian issue for about 20 years. When I first came back in 2004. As soon as I came back, I had resolved to speak for the voiceless. And I've been doing that, like I said, ever since 2004. Currently, I am, I guess, convener of Iowans for Palestine. I don't claim to be a leader, really, but I convene the meetings and, write the updates on the Google group and things like that. And help plan, our events, which include things like bringing speakers in, having forums, having movies and things like that.
Okay, my name is Numan Abu Issa, and I am one of the leaders for the Iowans for Palestine, and also I am the Arab American Caucus chair with IDP, and also the platform subcommittee chair for the international affairs, and I am also with the Arab American Institute.
First, let's hear what they have to say about any changes they've noticed since these laws have passed.
I have not noticed any changes, and one of the things that the 2016 bill had pinpointed was that they were supposed to have a blacklist, and I haven't seen that blacklist. I have asked for it. As far as I know, it hasn't been found yet. I will continue to ask for it and to see what the deal is.
It's playing its role as a scare tactic, and I don't think they've tried to enforce any working for the government. You have to sign, in some other states, you have to sign a form saying that I will not boycott, divest, and so on. In Iowa, I haven't seen that done because I think they are learning their lessons from other states, and when then it does not stand in the court, so they kind of drop it. But they are still using those tactics in many other states. Iowa is not the only state.
Next, let's understand how these laws can affect individuals and not just companies.
The companies, are owned by individuals, and they employ individuals, and the companies have policies to regulate their individuals' behaviors, and those usually are stronger. Actually, the companies' regulations are more binding than other restrictions, because when you sign up to be employed by a company, you agree to their policies and not to violate any of their policies and procedures. If the companies have restrictions, they will impose those restrictions on their own employees and sometimes customers, and that is a choice they have to make, but it does impact the employees specifically.
All of this is to say that our freedom of speech is being compromised by this legislation. However, there are many advocates against the BDS movement. Why? Here, we'll dive into some counter-arguments commonly heard about the BDS movement. First, there's the argument that the BDS movement is counterproductive, or it does more harm than good. The assumption here is that as BDS grows, it will only further motivate Israeli forces to harm Palestinians. Although this argument seems to be rooted in good intentions, we must remember that the majority of Palestinians support BDS, which should not be discounted. Palestinians know better than allies what the best course of action would be. Additionally, the ones that are arguing that the BDS movement is counterproductive often do not come up with alternative methods of resistance that would achieve the same goals. Palestinians who support the BDS movement are aware of its consequences, but are willing to take the risk in order to obtain justice. Another very common argument against the BDS movement is that it is anti-Semitic, targeting Israel for being a Jewish state. However, the BDS movement is not targeting Jews or Israel because of its Jewish roots, but rather resisting Israel's colonialist and inhumane practices that violate international law. There are many Jews that support Palestinian rights and are anti-Zionist. Jewish Voice for Peace is the largest Jewish anti-Zionist organization in the world, fighting for equality, justice, and dignity for all people from the US to Palestine. So no, BDS is not an anti-Semitic movement. With all of that being said, there lies the question. How can we respond to these bills and continue to build transnational solidarities? In terms of how we can resist the legislation here in Iowa, the most obvious way for us to make legislative change is to contact our legislators.
Write to your legislators, talk to your legislators. Everyone can do that. It means more if you talk to your own legislator, but it doesn't hurt to talk to other legislators.
This method is risk-free. However, it is important that this is a collective effort, as both Pat and Newman have had issues with this process.
It's important to really write to them, whether you do it by email or call on the phone, because they actually do count the number of calls they get on a particular issue. And I have to tell you that a few years ago, another gentleman, Newman, and I, we've been talking about this issue to legislators for a really long time. And I hate to name names, but said to us, he wasn't going to talk to us anymore because he knew how we felt about the issue. So it's very important to get a large number of people to, so it doesn't look like it's just us.
Despite this caveat, directly contacting legislators is the most effective way to make change, but you have to be smart about it. Here are a couple of rules of thumb when contacting your legislators. 1. Understand your biases. This will allow you to be more aware of your response in a given situation. 2. Learning about your legislator. Studying up on certain things, like how they voted on certain issues in the past, their party affiliation and what status or position they have in the legislature, and how they've responded to constituents, will help you prepare for making calls more personal and may even equip you with the knowledge for you to feel comfortable meeting in person. 3. Understand the issue at hand. You should be able to explain the issue to a legislator like you would to a friend. Be prepared to answer questions, but also be honest when you don't know the answer. And lastly, be aware of any counter-arguments you might hear. Some ways to contact your legislators include calls, letters, emails, fax, and meeting in person. There are almost always scripts or templates available for all of these contact methods except meeting in person. The 5 Calls app is a great resource for finding templates and contact information for your representatives. Next, I'll examine the ways that we can build transnational solidarities while staying in our Iowa bubble. But first, let's hear what Pat says about it.
One of the best ways is to get informed. Read reputable sources. There are a million of them. If you get onto one or two, then they'll refer you to certain other ones. And Haaretz is a left-leaning Israeli newspaper. B'Tselem is a human rights organization out of Israel. Jeff Halper, who is the head of the Israeli Committee Against Home Demolitions. There are lots of places where we can get informed, and I think that's the best thing to do. The second thing to do is to just, hit their pocketbooks. Look at the list of Israeli products that are being boycotted and boycott them yourself. And then gather together with other people who are doing the same thing. Again, Iowans for Palestine is one of the ones that's doing it here in Iowa, but there are other groups. There are groups in Des Moines and in other areas as well. So.
The first method that Pat describes as a way to influence global movements is to get informed. She provides a number of resources to start from, like Haaretz, B'Tselem, and Jeff Halper. However, the journey of self-education is not an easy one. It's often very confusing to someone who is not already involved and educated on such a topic. It's hard to find reputable sources that aren't news outlets, and when you're not well-versed in what you're researching, you may not know what indicates bias. Being educated on BDS is extremely important. But it's not the easiest process, nor is it the most effective way to make an immediate change on your community and beyond. The next way to build transnational solidarities is to participate in BDS yourself. The BDS movement is calling for targeted boycotts, meaning only boycotting a small handful of companies in order to make the largest impact. These companies include HP, Siemens, AXA, Puma, Israeli Fruits and Vegetables, SodaStream, Ava, and Sabra. Other companies that many supporters of BDS, including myself, are boycotting include Starbucks, McDonald's, Walmart, and Amazon. Participating in BDS is also a risk-free practice, if you are a citizen of Iowa and not influenced by company policy. This is also an accessible and versatile way to make global change. If you absolutely must purchase from one of these companies, that's okay. There are plenty of companies to boycott, and even reducing how frequently you purchase from these companies will make an impact. The last method that Pat describes to build transnational solidarities is to meet with other people who endorse BDS and are fighting for the Palestinian cause. Iowans for Palestine is one such group, and there are other coalitions in the state fighting for the same cause, such as the Mennonite Palestine-Israel Network, or MENOPIN for short. Meeting with like-minded people in your community is a great way to start making change locally. However, attending meetings may be difficult if you don't have reliable transportation or have other commitments that conflict with the arranged time. One last strategy that I would like to include is to have conversations with friends and loved ones. Once you understand BDS a little more thoroughly, perhaps after watching this video, talking to people about our current situation in Iowa, as well as the situation in Palestine, will help spread awareness and educate others on this topic. Newman and Pat have been taking steps to build transnational solidarities themselves. Let's see what they're doing.
As I mentioned, I work with UMKR, and they are an international organization. And there are other international organizations that group works with, including U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Human Rights, I think is what their name is now. Americans for Palestine, American Muslims for Palestine, I'm sorry. DAWN, and other national and international organizations. We work directly with Palestinians as well that are in the West Bank, so and Gaza. So a lot of the organizations that we meet with and work with are centered in DC. So they have a lot of information that is really helpful to us on our legislation nationally, because they can speak, walking to the offices of our legislators, and we can help them out by talking to them as constituents, and then letting the national organizations know how a particular legislator stands on the issue. So.
Yeah, I work with the national groups in my circles, I guess, with the Arab American Institute, with the ADC, and other Arab Americans in different states. So we correspond about our experiences and try to learn from each other's mistakes and try to educate our own people here. We had a movie about BDS, I guess, recently in Iowa, and we just learned from those court cases elsewhere in the country, and then also keep working with our legislatures and let them know that this is a concern of ours, and we like our freedoms back. So I appear on many Arabic-speaking TVs regularly, and they ask me those questions, and I speak about those issues, about my activities, about what's going on in Iowa, what's going on in the U.S. So I have audience in Egypt, in Turkey, in BBC, Al Jazeera, and those are Arabic stations, and they broadcast in the Middle East, in the Arabic-speaking world. So I've been talking about issues to that effect, our marches, our activities, our stand in this current subject. I've been doing it since I was, I guess, national delegate for John Kerry about 20 years ago. So,
nice.
Yeah.
So, what have we learned? We now know the history of the BDS movement, as well as what anti-BDS legislation is. We know what the legislation is in Iowa and how it's affecting Iowans. We dissected common arguments against the BDS movement, as well as examined the ways to make change in our community, as well as build transnational solidarities. I'm not going to tell you one thing that I want you to leave with. Different viewers will have different takeaways depending on what they already know. But, no matter what you learned, I encourage you to reflect on what methods of action you feel are most attainable for you, and to follow through with steps towards peace.
The occupation has got to go! Hey, hey! Ho, ho! The occupation has got to go! Hey, hey! Got to go! Hey, hey! Ho, ho! The occupation has got to go! Hey, hey! Ho, ho! The occupation has got to go! Hey, hey! Ho, ho! Free, free, free Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine!